Hello and welcome to Politics Today, and in this programme this week we will be discussing the government's immigration policy, and that is to send illegal immigrants all the way to Rwanda, which has been heavily criticised by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. So to join me in this programme today, I'm joined by David Kurten, who is the leader of the Heritage Party, together with David Hews from Prayer for Parliament. Good to see you both, and I can't get your names wrong in this programme, so it's David and David, which is easy. And David Kurten, can you just give us a bit of an update on the work of the Heritage Party, because we know that we've got important local elections coming up in May, so I guess a busy time for you.
Yeah, that's right, very busy. I mean, of course, our main purpose is to stand in elections so that we can challenge the parties that are there and to hopefully make a change and make laws which are good for the country rather than the ones that I think they put in which are bad for the country over the last few years. So we've got candidates standing in various places in England, and for the first time also we got some candidates in Wales, which is exciting, and we got one candidate standing in the Northern Ireland Assembly elections, which is very, very exciting. That's a proportional system, and obviously that's a bit of a higher level than the local elections, so we're really hoping that our candidate does well there.
Fabulous. David, do you want to give us an update on Prayer for Parliament, particularly as we go into these important local elections?
Yeah, well, we've been focusing specifically over the last few weeks on Northern Ireland. They're coming up for a general election for the Northern Ireland Assembly. The problem has been, as I think you've heard in previous things, is that Sir Geoffrey Donaldson has been speaking to Boris in the past about the danger of not pulling Article 16 and actually breaking the protocol, because Northern Ireland is being treated trade-wise as part of Europe, whereas in fact it's part of the United Kingdom, and that causing a lot of problems. And therefore at the moment you've got the situation where the polls have got Sinn Féin as the favourites to take over Stormont on the 5th of May. So we've been praying and interceding into that. Myself and a couple of others of our team are going out on the 28th of this month for a couple of days to pray with Sir Geoffrey and also pray with the DUP and any other people, but to specifically be there to support them. And we're just praying that God will be able to move at the next general election. So a lot of the people are saying, oh, well, you know, it's not looking good. Well, I just remind people, look what happened when we had the referendum vote, and look what happened when Boris's last general election. The polls are wrong. God can do a lot, but it does need an awful lot of prayer, and it needs an awful lot of intercession. Absolutely.
Thank you for David. I really appreciate the work that you do as well. And David, talking about the topic of today's programme, I mean, it's quite a radical proposal put together by a government, isn't it, to have illegal immigrants, so those that are trying to cross over, for example, the English Channel from the Middle East and other places, to come into our country illegally, to then be taken 6,000 miles to Rwanda in Africa, where they will actually deal with the asylum seekers there. They're going on a one-way ticket, and they will be able to apply for citizenship of Rwanda and not Britain. What are your thoughts on this government proposal to deal with this illegal immigration by shipping them off or flying them off to Rwanda?
Well, it is a good idea, actually, and it's not unprecedented, because Australia's been doing this since 2012. They've been sending people to Nauru who come across in boats who are coming illegally as asylum seekers or economic migrants, and they say, you know, if you come in a boat, you don't get to Australia, you have no right of resettlement in Australia, you go to Nauru or Papua New Guinea, and that's where you stay. And that actually has cut down the number of people trying to come in illegally through the boats, sort of crossing the straits from Indonesia. So it's a good idea. It's an idea. I've been saying this for many, many years. Other people in politics have been saying this for many years as well. I mean, I think this is something they should have done years and years ago, because now we've got a big problem with migration across the English Channel. You know, in 2019, there were 2,000. 2020, 8,000. 2021, 28,000. This year, we're on course for 60,000 plus people coming across in dinghies who are, essentially, they're not, I would call them asylum shoppers, because they've been through lots of different countries and they're choosing to try to come to the UK because that's where they get the best deal of benefits and human rights lawyers and all this kind of thing. So the government has allowed this problem to get out of control, and now they're coming up with a solution that they should have put in years and years ago. But to be honest with you, the scale of it is very, very small. And really, I think it's not radical enough. It's too little, too late.
And David, I mean, this is now a kind of flagship policy on behalf of the Boris's government. Now, I think it's actually very much like David so much endorse this policy, because there's a difference between say Christians who are facing persecuted somewhere around the world, applying for religious citizenship in this country or escaping persecution, than those who, as David Kurten was saying, those that are just getting on little small dinghy boats and coming over to the UK because they're seeking a better life, and they're seeking to do that illegally. So they're not applying through the right channels. Do you think that this will be a deterrent to knowing, for example, that this will probably save lives, because they're not going to want to cross over the English Channel knowing that they're going to be sent to Rwanda? I mean, that's not where they really want to end up. So do you think this policy can actually work?
I'm fully in favour, as David has said. I think it's a great idea. The traffickers have got to be stopped. If they can't be stopped, and I was about to stand on the beach to get in a dinghy with the chance that I might not get the other side, and if I got the other side, I'd be shipped off 6,000 miles to an African country. I would think twice about getting in that dinghy. And I think the other thing is that also, for those going to Rwanda, what probably a lot of you Christians don't know, but at our church, our assistant pastor, his wife, runs a Christian children's charity in Rwanda. And Rwanda, so many people, more percentage of people are born again, spirit-filled Christians in Rwanda, and also the president and many of the government and leaders of various organisations are born again, spirit-filled. There's been such revival there that if you ship off these people down to Rwanda, there's a high probability they'll be brought to the Lord over in Rwanda. Unfortunately, in this country, if we keep them here, no one's going to actually lead them to the Lord anyway, because this country, being a Western country, people are so safe, they've got every benefit they want. That's what makes it difficult for people to actually accept Jesus at the moment. Until something makes people wake up in this country, I'd ship them off. And the probability is they might meet Jesus there.
And Dave, doesn't this pose a big problem for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party? Because according to recent opinion polls and surveys, there's a huge number of Labour supporters that actually support this initiative of flying out illegal refugees to Rwanda, and that this could pose a big problem if Keir Starmer continues to oppose it without actually providing any answers or any solutions to this mass problem we have in this country of illegal immigration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have got a big problem because they're trying to ride two horses at the same time. Keir Starmer is of the metropolitan London elite, the progressive elite, which is into progressive politics and all the sort of, cultural things that we maybe wouldn't agree with. Whereas the sort of working class base, what is now called the Red Wall, up in the sort of north and the northeast and the Midlands, are working class people. They're old core vote that is actually quite disgusted with the progressive policies and cultural policies of the metropolitan elite. So once again, he's trying to ride two horses, and he'll always come out on the side of the sort of London lovies, if you like, who would be very much against this kind of immigration policy of, sending the people coming across illegally to Rwanda, because they can virtue signal about it and they can feel good about it because that's a sort of progressive ideology. but he's going to lose all of the people, in the Red Wall who before voted for Brexit. He had this problem with Brexit, and he's going to have that problem again with immigration as well.
And David, the government could actually announce this new immigration policy to deal with illegal immigration while in the EU. So doesn't this also show that this is a triumph for Brexit? The fact that we can now determine our own policies free of the European Union. So we would then, whilst the EU is restricted on how it deals with illegal immigration, and this is obviously one of the biggest issues in the French presidential elections right now, that because we're no longer in the European Union, we can actually act and introduce policies such as this Rwanda immigration policy.
This is basically just the same as when we voted for Brexit. The people did not want this country flooded with so many people. Tony Blair and Labour governments before opened the doors and let the floodgate come in of people from abroad. There was no restriction whatsoever. So we're top heavy with people who have come in and settled in this country. There's no more room for people to come in, and we've got to do something drastic. The other thing, Keir Starmer has already said that he does not believe in God, so he's not searching for a godly answer. And I think there's an awful lot of good people in the Labour Party who must be really worried, because the answer is not to turn against this whole situation. It's a good policy. The ones who are screaming, I don't think are giving it any thought. They're just showing their revenge and anger.
And David Kurten here, so I'm just going to read you a quote, because the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has got involved in this discussion. He used his Easter sermon to attack the government's immigration policy, and even released a press release, obviously to the Sunday Times, to pick up. So this could be one of the big headlines for Easter Sunday. He says, and it cannot carry the weight of our national responsibilities as a country formed by Christian values, because subcontracting out our responsibilities, even to a country that seeks to do well, like Rwanda, is the opposite of the nature of God. He himself took responsibility for our failures. Is it right that Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, should get involved in a domestic policy decision made by the government on the issue of illegal refugees, knowing that he was silent when it came to the closure of churches during COVID-19, but is wanting to speak up and criticise the government over this policy, hasn't suggested any solutions. As far as he's concerned, we should all have open borders and allow anyone to come into this country, despite the fact that they are breaking the laws. But he's using God in order to say that God will bring judgment on this government and our country for this policy.
Well, he can say what he wants, but he's completely wrong on this. But he does have a position, and he has a position in the House of Lords. Obviously, as the Archbishop, he can sit there and he can take a vote in the House of Lords as well. So he does have a political position, but he's not elected. So, I think he should, be quiet like the Queen on these kind of issues. And, he shouldn't be getting involved in, what is actually now become sort of a party political matter. Some parties would support this, other parties would not support this. So, that he's displaying partisanship. But you said it, he had here an article in the Times, a press statement ready to go. So it was already, this was not spontaneous. This seems like something that's planned, that he had his Church of England or Lambeth Palace propaganda machine ready to go with this story, ready to come out and say something to virtue signal about this. But the thing is, the things he really should be talking about, I mean, he didn't talk about churches being closed down over the COVID period. I don't think he said anything about abortion or anything like that, or pro-life issues that I can remember. So, those are the things he should be talking about. As well as on Easter Sunday, he should be talking about resurrection and salvation and the Christian message, not dabbling in politics. And the one time of the year that you'd think he would just focus solely on trying to save souls, he's used that to become political. And I think that's absolutely wrong.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on this one, David? Because there's been many people that have criticised the Archbishop, saying he should not get involved in domestic policy. But to actually bring up and say that God would bring judgment upon our country for the government's decision to tackle what is a massive problem. Because if we continue to allow illegal immigrants into the country who don't go through the right procedures. I mean, this is a drain on the nation's resources, finances, with social health care, schools, hospital, but also the other disturbing thing about this one is the majority of young men are doing this. And there is an Islamic term for this, and it's a hijra. To actually go to a native land, a foreign land that is not an Islamic country, and change the population so it becomes an Islamic country. So don't we have to recognise this aspect in this? And surely the Archbishop has actually failed to defend our Judeo-Christian heritage by saying we should have open borders and illegal immigrants are free to come to this country and take up residence.
Yep, he's certainly let the side down. He's playing politics. He's not. I doubt whether he's actually been interceding and seeking God for guidance as what the true answer is. But I'm sure it's not the one he spoke out on Easter. And leaving the floodgates open. This, I mean, when I grew up, this was a Christian nation. We knew it was a Christian nation. Nowadays, we've let so many people in of other faiths. The result is now people say, oh, it's a multi-faith nation, this, that, and the other. It isn't. It's a Christian nation. And yet there are so many people of other faiths here, and they say, no, it's not a Christian nation anymore. It is a Christian nation. And we have to stand as Christians and speak it and pray for it and intercede. But the Archbishop of Canterbury is too busy on politics and not praying enough. And the sad thing is, he says things that I believe aren't from the Holy Spirit. If he was speaking from the Holy Spirit, we would have got a message, as David said, at Easter time, and he probably wouldn't get involved on the politics. When we go into Parliament, we're not there as a party, we're not there supporting any party, we're there as a team that is a godly team, interceding on behalf of the Lord, and we support people from all parties. And often people say, well, aren't you, you're this party? No, we're not. We're Christians standing for the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's what I think he should be doing as well.
Absolutely. And David, I suppose the other aspect of this one is this suicidal policy that the West has adopted over the last 30 years, and that's allowing the uncontrolled mass immigration to the West as a means of destroying our Judeo-Christian heritage and our foundation. I mean, even Theresa May, for example, I think it was back in 2016, signed up to this UN charter calling for open borders. And surely the whole concept of open borders is part of a globalist plan to break up and destroy the nation state so that the nations no longer have their own characteristics, they no longer have their own cultures, and therefore can easily be integrated almost into a world government. And this is the agenda that we're seeing in the United States and also that of the European Union. But it does kind of destroy the nation state. Is this the real intention behind this kind of uncontrolled mass migration we've seen for the last 20, 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, Theresa May, 2018, she signed up to the UN Global Migration Compact. And earlier that year, she signed up to the Marrakesh Declaration, which was another sort of a plan to integrate sort of the freedom of movement between Europe and some African countries. And then you got the Barcelona Declaration before that as well. So those three things together are basically, documents that support open borders and open movement. They call it regularizing migration. So what is now illegal is to be sort of, regularized, and that's to be thought of as like the governments working together to make safe ways for people to migrate. When actually what would be better is to have our own people trained up in the skills we need to do jobs in this country and develop the economies of countries in other places. I mean, Rwanda, for example, people think of Rwanda as a place where there was genocide, and there was in 1994, but that's 28 years ago. And now it's come on so much, it's doing very, very well. And as David said, it's a very Christian country. It's got people who've got good vision for the future, and that's sort of like the terrible things that happened in the past is still there in memory, but it's moved on from there. So we're not living in a world where we actually need to bring millions and millions of people from other countries to the West for their benefit. I mean, this is it's a globalist plan to get rid of identity, if you like, and to dismantle cultures and nation states. And then that will pave the way, of course, for a global government where people don't have any rights and they don't have any connection to the past, to their nation, to the future. So the idea that they want to get rid of nations and replace them with states. So then the very word nation means a place where you're born. You have a connection to it. But a state can be any state. It can be this state today, it can be that state tomorrow, and there's no sort of people just come and go willy-nilly. And I think that's the sort of world the sort of globalists want, and we need to recognise this, and we need to say no, that's wrong. We need to hold to the nations, they're God-instituted, things that every people should have a homeland, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely. And David, this is something that we need to pray in, really, because this is such a big issue, this issue of uncontrolled illegal immigration. And we saw that really that under Tony Blair, when Tony Blair was Prime Minister and Peter Mandelson was very much in control of this policy, he wanted mass illegal immigration into this country because he felt that this would increase the support for the Labour Party, that they would naturally vote for the Labour Party, and maybe bringing an extra million votes into the Labour Party. We've seen that the Democrats have also adopted this kind of policy in the States, but it comes at a huge social price and a huge social cost, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, this is how the Labour Party in the past, as you said, they get more support, bringing people in. They're really delighted they've been brought in by that party, therefore they'll support them, come through everything. And they look at politics through a particular party, not what's best for the nation. There's this government trying to do something good, but everything's they're getting a lot of opposition, and the opposition at the moment, there's an awful lot of opposition playing politics because there's coming up for the local elections. You've got Partygate at the moment. That's not the most important thing. We've got a situation where, if you take Ukraine, for example, you've got a person who's really mad who could press the nuclear button today if he decided he wanted to drop a bomb somewhere in Europe, which would change the whole situation around and wake people up. And Boris is standing up against it. And I think, in that sense, I think he's doing a very good job. The situation where we need to pray more is that Boris is a very good statesman outside this nation, but he's turning his back on what's going on in Northern Ireland, what's going on in Britain and everything else, while the opposition are making mincemeat of the Partygate thing, which isn't actually that important. So the whole thing, there's such a lack of prayer, and this is where we need more prayer.
I have to kind of say that Partygate is important because we know that our Prime Minister lied to Parliament regarding this. You can't have COVID-19 policies and want everyone else to accept it while you completely flout them and ignore them, and also the hurt and the pain that's caused. So, he has to pay a price for that as our Prime Minister. I know that, for example, the situation in Ukraine could become a nuclear issue, and that threatens the security of the entire Western world. What's going on in Northern Ireland is very significant, and domestic policies as well. But I still think that Boris needs to be held account for that one. But that's a separate programme.
I think it's gone too far in that direction. That's what I'm saying.
And David, is there any way of turning this to a kind of electoral advantage, the government's policy to actually tackle illegal immigration? Because we do have local elections. Actually, the local elections be on the day of this actual recording and people would have voted. But to the voters, this is a big issue. And what have you noticed on the doorstep when you've asked ordinary voters what they think about immigration, particularly illegal immigration? Yeah,
I mean, it is a big issue. It's not the biggest issue for people, because when you go to local people in local areas, they will talk about potholes, they'll talk about crime, for example, they'll talk about parks being built on, massive development on the Greenbelt. Those are issues that sort of come up up on the doorsteps. But underlying it, there is this sense everywhere, outside the big cities, especially in the countryside places, that immigration is too much, it's got out of control, and it affects local people because you have people coming in, it changes the character of the area, and this is something that you can't be avoided when you have a lot of people from a different place coming in, and it changes things. And obviously then there's more pressure on services, schools, for example, GP surgeries and stuff, so it is a big issue. I think they've done this deliberately at this time. They announced it early April 2022 at the start of the local election campaign. So that is convenient timing, really. So this is what they're calling Operation Red Meat, which is throwing their core voters a bit of red meat to get them back on side. After the disaster of Partygate and all the other things the last 2 years, they want people to forget that and say, oh, look, now we're doing something. But the thing is, we've got to remember, they created the problem in the first place. They've been in power for 12 years and they've done nothing about it. It's got worse and worse and worse. And now at the start of an election campaign, they're saying, look, we're doing something about the problem that we've let go on for 12 years. So, I'm quite... perhaps critical of this and sceptical of why they've done it and announced it at this time. And also the scale of it is very small. I mean, they've got 120 million for the scheme. That's going to send 1,000 people to Rwanda. Whereas, you've got 100,000 people come across in dinghies over, since 2019 up to what will be the end of this year. So it's really not going to do an awful lot.
And David, with about a minute left of the programme, how should our viewers be praying into this situation?
Well, the country's in a right mess. All the parties are doing everything wrong. Nobody's actually focused on God other than the DUP, who are all...
Also the Heritage Party as well. There's David there as well. I can't let you get away.
Yeah, no, I agree there. That's a good one. Yeah. There's a lack of God. We need to be praying and interceding for people to literally pray that people's eyes would be open, their eyes and their hearts would be open, and they would literally put God first, politics second, and their party second.
Excellent. So David, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Politics Today, as we discuss the very important issue of illegal immigration. And I just want to thank you for watching today's programme. First, personally, I find that the Archbishop using his Easter message to hijack the government's immigration policy to transfer illegal immigrants to Rwanda is kind of shocking. He was silent when it came to the churches being closed in lockdown. He should have used his Easter message to encourage the nation to pray. He should have used his Easter message to share the amazing story of the good news of the gospel, that Jesus died and rose again and had forgiven us our sins, and shouldn't have meddled in the government's policy and discussing whether this is right or wrong, saying this brings God's judgment. So it's important, Christians, that we don't get deceived, that we stay alert, and we continue to pray. So thank you for watching this week's Politics Today.